2024 Farm Progress Show, Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, here at the Wyffels booth, talking right now with Eric Wilson of Wyffels. Thanks so much for taking the time to visit with us.
Thanks, Dustin.
So I know we've talked at length about the new facility in Ames. Really excited about seeing that. I know you're going to be showing that off here during the Farm Progress Show as well. But one of the things I think we need to really get back to here while we're talking is what you guys have seen in the fields around Iowa this year as far as performance from Wyffels. And let's talk about that, first of all, what you've seen.
Yeah, so things are looking really good out there. You go out and you pull any random ear, Dustin, and the kernel counts and the hybrids look incredible. But there is plenty of issues out there as well. And we can talk about those in any order you would like.
Well, let's go ahead and let's just start at the top and work our way down. What kind of things have we seen that are challenging hybrids across the board?
So if we go back to spring planting conditions, I think this was one of the widest planting windows that I can remember. I think 75 days is where I had the planting window pegged from, depending on where you were at in Iowa especially. But we had a lot of water. We probably had above average nitrogen loss this year, and we did start seeing disease in some places earlier than we expected to see that. So those two issues, or those three things, are kind of coming to full culmination as we get now close to the harvest season.
Right.
So there's definitely things to talk about out there.
So talking first with that Mother Nature situation, no matter how good the hybrids are, no matter how good technology is, Mother Nature's still in charge, and she proves it
exactly
day in and day out. But obviously it's the things that come after, the diseases, pressure. Every situation is different. We've come off of 4 years of major drought. Didn't expect to make up all that water table in 1 month, but we did. And so now we're looking at diseases we haven't had to deal with for a while, and how do the traits stack up, and being prepared for that when we kind of planned for a drought that was going to take a time to relieve, and all of a sudden now we're into an excess of water. How do they stack up?
Yeah, so we're getting good looks as far as like hybrid characteristics on things that we haven't got necessarily great opportunities in the last couple of years. Like you said, we spent 2 years for the most part getting into a drought in a lot of the state, and it took us about 2 weeks to get out of it this last spring. So things can change quick. We're getting good looks at disease tolerance across our hybrids this year. There's even, I know we don't cover it, but if you go up into southern Minnesota, they're dealing with some southern rust right now. It's like southern rust got lost, jumped over the majority of Iowa, and kind of landed in Minnesota. So not something that those guys have typically had to deal with up there. Usually we see that in especially the southern part of the state or northern Missouri. A lot of tar spot. Did find tar spot early this year. Some things that I would add on top of that, I think with the weather that we had this spring and as wet as it was, farmers were very in tune with what to expect for disease pressure. And I actually feel like farmers made more fungicide applications this year than they did the last year, despite the price of corn. Usually those kind of go hand in hand, but I do feel like more fungicide applications got made, and I also feel like they got made very timely this year, and I think that's important. Things that have been sprayed with a single application, holding up pretty darn well for the most part. I'm actually very impressed at how well some of that has held disease off, not just tar spot, but everything's out there. You got common rust, southern rust in some places, northern, a lot of gray. So a lot of things chewing on this corn crop at this point.
But you also look at there, you talk about the fact inputs are going to be tough because, prices are down. Sometimes farmers are cutting corners, and even though we try to advise them not to, because there are some places you just can't afford to cut. But that also says a lot then for the hybrid, that you can go with a single application of fungicide and seem to be getting ahead of the problem and keeping it at bay. That says a lot about what you're starting with, because that's, obviously the good foundation of the seed is where it has to start.
Yep. And I won't say it all. I'm not going to say it's going to work out like that every year, right, Dustin? But this year, I think the timing piece of it was huge. And I think that's important that we talk about, and guys remember that in the future, especially when we're looking at inputs like fungicide. We understand that's not a cheap application.
So with that large planting window that we saw, obviously harvest is going to be just as all over the place because of the fact some crops got planted in the end of April, some got planted in the end of May. Obviously, you're going to look at a big difference of time there. Obviously, though, Mother Nature always keeping us at her will. What kind of things do these farmers need to be thinking about when they're looking at two different windows of opportunity?
Yeah, so stock integrity is something that we need to keep an eye on. Again, going back to this spring with all that wet weather, we lost a lot of nitrogen. You can pretty clearly tell which fields are better off in terms of nitrogen health at this point than those that aren't. We spent a lot of time encouraging guys to maybe make a supplemental N application on top of what they were already doing, and those are showing up, in my opinion, to be very beneficial so far. So if we didn't decide to do that for whatever reason, keep an eye on those fields for sure. That also plays into disease. If we're a little starved for nutrients, that plant has to work harder to stay healthy, and it doesn't have the nutrients to do so. So that can play into that factor as well. Especially some of those late planting dates in the north, Dustin, those have a ways to go before we're at black layer. So they're going to have to stand probably certainly longer than the last 2 years of harvest that we've had. So those are things you want to keep an eye on too. Go out, do the push, do the pinch test. A lot of the area, I know on the southern border of Iowa, there's some corn that's black layered or going to be black layered already. Usually when you get to that half milk line stage, you can tell a lot about what the stalks are doing at that point. So I just encourage guys to get out and take a look at that. I think you're going to find some good surprises. I think you could also find some surprises that you want to keep an eye on as well as you make that plan for harvest.
So we know one thing too is the fact that the crops that haven't been heavily adversely affected by the weather in some of those areas have looked really well. And as you mentioned, all over the state, we're seeing some good surprises. There may be some producers out there that may have looked in their fields, used different companies and say, hey, my corn didn't do that this year. Talk about some of the hybrids that have performed really well and maybe put that bug in their ear. I know, lack of better terms, bug in the ear with corn you don't want to hear about, but put that idea in their head for next year about some of the hybrids they should be looking at from Wyffels if they weren't happy with what they saw this year in their fields.
Yeah, so I would say everything that I've seen so far this year, I'm very happy with. We've got a couple of numbers that aren't necessarily new this year, but this was kind of their big launch year. So we've got them across quite a few grower acres this year. And two that I would highlight, W6886 and W8086. Both of those look very good. Both are kind of in their major launch year, getting a lot of good reports. You know, I'm an agronomist, so usually I get the angry text messages, is like what I like to call them. I have gotten more good text messages about W8086 this year than I think I have on any product that we've ever released. So that comes in at a nice RM, covers majority of Iowa in particular. That is one, along with W8086, I would encourage guys to look at.
All right, so our listeners, viewers out there don't have a chance to come to the Farm Progress Show and talk to you guys here. Where's the best place for them to get that conversation started for planning for 2025?
Best place, go to our website, wyffels.com. Anything you want to know about products, we've got a bunch of agronomy resources on there. That it'll even hone you down into the sales level and put you in contact with someone in sales, depending on where you're at, get you to the right person that you need to talk to start having those conversations.
All right, well, Eric, we thank you so much for taking time to visit with us today.
Thank you, Dustin.